Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait for a moment for everyone to join us, and then we'll get started. So appreciate your patience. We might give it another 30 seconds, and then we'll dive into what I think is going to be a really interesting conversation. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, which sounds very formal and really doesn't hint to the type of conversation that we're going to have this evening. But my name is Sinéad Burke, and I have the great privilege of leading the team at Tilting the Lens, which is an accessibility consultancy that's rooted in education, advocacy, and design. In terms of the work that we do, we ask the question, is this accessible? But even more, what is accessibility? This webinar series that we do is with many of the people that we admire most in this field, to really broaden our understanding and to try to put language around what good practice and accessibility really means. Speaking of, let's begin with our access accommodations. To start, a visual description. I am a white cisgendered woman who uses the pronouns she and her. I have brown shoulder-length hair that was air dried today rather than manicured in any shape or form. I am wearing a yellow round neck Tilting the Lens jumper that when I lean up you can see the logo, and I have bright pink lipstick on to make me feel some energy on this Tuesday evening, and I am sat at home in my home office here in Ireland. Joining us on screen we have two sign language interpreters. We have an ASL interpreter and a BSL interpreter. These interpreters should be visible to you based on the spotlight and screen view. If you're having any challenges accessing the interpreters, please do let us know in the chat box, and the Tilting the Lens team will respond and support your access accommodations. We also have AI captions. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click Show Captions, those will deliver AI captions for you. But in terms of our session today, thank you very much for registering. I cannot believe that we are having this conversation. Quarterly at Tilting the Lens, we meet and we set objectives around the people that we really want to talk to. Emma, who leads on community and impact at Tilting the Lens, said, what about talking to Kerry, who is the Disability Liaison Officer at Wrexham? It was a pipe dream, particularly after the success of being featured and Welcome to Wrexham, the Disney Plus doc. I won't lie, I didn't think it would be possible. And yet here we are this evening. I feel very lucky to be having this conversation, and even more to be learning from Kerry. Already, as part of the registration for this evening's event, you have put together some amazing questions for Kerry. This is not just going to be a one-way dialogue. I would love for you to introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Where are you in the world? What has you interested in this topic? What do you want to learn about? Also use the Q&A function, as we'll spend some time answering those questions as we get to the end. But for now, that is more than enough from me. Kerry, I would love for you to give a visual description of yourself, please, and a brief introduction into who you are.
Yeah, my name is Kerry Evans. I live in Wales. I'm a wheelchair user. I've got red hair. I've today got on my Wrexham AFC work that's got a Wrexham badge on it. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. I have had the pleasure of getting to know Kerry over the past couple of weeks and learning a little bit more about not just the work that she does, but how she got here. I often think about the jobs that didn't exist when we were growing up, if we were studying, if we went to school and education, and the idea of being a disability liaison officer at a football club, for me, feels like something one could only imagine. And it's amazing to see it as a reality and more of it. But Kerry, in terms of your journey overall, but particularly in terms of the 6 and 7 years that you've been working at Wrexham, how has that come about? And even in your own experiences with your disability in and of itself, I would love to learn more. And that is a very big question for a first question and not so accessible, but I'm over enthusiastic. So tell me everything.
Yeah, I mean, just to introduce myself, when I was born, I was born with slight cerebral palsy down the right side of my body. Not a big problem to me, very slight. At the age of 30, I had a bleed on the brain, which they then called a cerebral bleed. So that was where I was then paralysed down the right side of my body, which was already affected, and it affected internal organs as well. So pretty big. So at the age of 30, having worked full time in, many different sort of careers, nothing specific, I came out of work. My husband became a full-time carer, and if I'm honest, I never ever thought I'd work again. I thought that would be me. Sort of fast forward a good few years, and our local football club that we were actually season ticket holders at, me and my husband, were putting out for a Disability Liaison Officer role at the time as a volunteer. So I applied along with 6 or 7 other people. I was the only person who had a disability. Everybody else was able-bodied. I got told that I'd got the role. Yeah, I thought to begin with it was potentially meeting and greeting people on match days. How wrong could I have been? Because I took on and started working a full-time role as a volunteer, which I did for 5 years. And I think one, the role, I've got the compassion, I understand, I realise what people are going through. I think that the club were very forward thinking in putting somebody like myself, and in a similar position, into this role. I feel that I've absolutely loved it, but I've grown this role, I think, personally myself. I mean, the more that we did good, the more that we made changes, and the more people said, this is life-changing, this is making such a huge difference. You want to do more, you want to please people, you want people to be able to do something and have a hobby and be able to be like everybody else, which is how life should be. So very much the role spiraled very, very quickly. And I was a full-time volunteer for 5 years until, may we say it, obviously our famous owners took over, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. And at that point, I was then offered full-time employment, something that I never, ever thought I would ever do again. But I've taken the plunge, and I'm now working full-time for Wrexham Football Club as their Disability Liaison Officer.
I mean, already there is several things coming to mind in terms of what you just shared there. I think so often when we think about disability, often the assumption is even that people are born disabled. And as you've just spoken to there in your own personal journey, disability isn't often a constant. It can change over time. Yeah. And also the reality that, on average, 50 to 75% of disabled people are unemployed. Now, some of that is because of ableism in society. Often we think, or others think, that we don't have value to add in terms of organizations. Sometimes that is challenges and feeling trapped within benefit systems and not being able to leave those supports for full-time employment because of the risk that comes with it. But even listening to your own narration of your journey and kind of overcoming those biases that we sometimes even have within ourselves, and then the success that brings. Like, I think about the strength of Wrexham based on the lived experience and the expertise that you have brought to that role, and even that change between being a volunteer and being an employee.
Yeah.
How is that different now? Is the role the same for you in terms of moving from volunteer to full-time?
There's far more to it. I was very much doing a full-time role before. There is a lot more to the role now, and there's a lot more commitment. I feel that when I was a volunteer, if I wasn't well, I could think, well, perhaps I won't go for the next couple of days. Now I have to get up and I go. And that's a positive for me, because that gets me out of bed. That's what I need to go and do, and that's what keeps me going. So I feel there is more commitment. It was a huge decision for me to go to full-time employment, because we'd been, unfortunately, through no fault of our own, on benefit system for many, many years. And that was a little bit of a crutch. Regardless of our situation in life, we knew we had our benefits. but I'm very, very proud to be back working full time, and it was definitely the right decision for me.
I think what you've spoken to there echoes so much of the experience of disabled people. If we look internationally, in the US, there is often legislation that says if one is in receipt of SSIA benefits, for example, you can't have more than $2,500 in your checking account. And that is also inclusive of the fact that if you get married, collectively, you can't have more than $2,500 in your checking account. So when it becomes about healthcare, when it becomes about access to dignity, access to personal assistance, to your point, disabled people and their caregivers and their families have to make tough decisions. But I think about the journey that you've been on and the changes that have been made because of those decisions. But I want to get back to Wrexham. You talked there about, the work that has been undertaken and how the role has grown. Now, I will admit that I'm not a football aficionado, not sure. However, I am just very interested in both access, of course, but also just access to joy, access to entertainment, access to equity of experience. Can you tell me a little bit about the changes that have been made at Wrexham to create that more accessible environment?
Yes, of course. Many, probably too many for now, but some of the bigger things are we started accessible away travel. So when I started, all our fans went away on coaches to all the away fixtures. We didn't have anything in place for wheelchair users, and I felt in this day and age that was really important that everybody was included. So I not only instigated that at the very beginning when we were fan owned, I actually raised all the funds for that to run because I felt it was so important. So that meant that half of the season, 12 games, we could offer wheelchair users to go to away games and experience being with all the other fans, because it's completely different being at away game to our home fixtures. So that was something huge. We had people who'd never ever been to an away game before that were suddenly able to access that because of what we put in place. Things that have been done in the ground, we've got a quiet zone and a sensory hub. Our quiet zone was started off because there was an autism friendly game that was done actually before I started my role and had been a huge success. And then when I started, I said, well, why does that have to be just a game that was put in place? We need this in place for every single game of the season. So I worked with the National Autistic Society to put in place what was needed. So just to very quickly run through, instead of fans needing that quiet zone, needing to come through a turnstile, which can be very daunting, we have a double doorway accessible entrance. We have a quieter route because also if you're going to go through a busy concourse that could have 1,000 people in it before the fixture, that's also very daunting. When you get to our quiet zone, we have accessible stewards that work and are familiar faces to everybody that accesses that area. We offer out ear defenders. We offer out sensory packs. We now offer out weighted teddies and weighted blankets. We have in place a waitress service because, again, people can't perhaps go and queue at the concourse bars to go and get their beverages. So we have that in place for our quiet zone and all our wheelchair users at the ground. And then we have our sensory hub that is in place if somebody needs a quiet 5 minutes away from the fixture to calm down and gather their thoughts. That's now adjoined to our quiet zone. It's a huge success. We have far too many people wanting to use it than what we can fit in, and we have clubs in much higher leagues asking my advice on what I've put in place there to model on to actually do themselves. So that's a huge thing. We've now got 3 different wheelchair viewing platforms around the stadium. We've got a 2-tiered viewing platform for all our away fans. We've got 12 spaces for away fans, which is very much unheard of in our league. A lot of clubs don't have that amount of availability. And we have 2 platforms for our home fans, which is going to be more. We are building and doing more work as it speaks. And we also have the front row viewing for our home fans as well. We've now got braille signage all around the ground. Hearing loops in our shop and our hospitality areas, and we've got audio descriptive commentary. So again, that's something we offer out free of charge. The people who undertake that are absolutely fantastic. With doing that, and all we ask people to do is bring their own headsets for hygiene reasons, so that's a completely free of charge service and really does help with somebody enjoying the matchday experience. And we're bronze Makaton friendly, so that's something that is being improved hopefully for the new season. And I could go on and on. They are things that I can think of off the top of my head, but we're trying. What came across to me very early on in my role, there's so many disabilities and you want to help everybody. You want everybody to have the very best match day experience possible to come into Wrexham Football Club. So bit by bit, we're helping every single disability that we possibly can.
I think what's so important about what you described there is that this is about progress and continuously ensuring that as many people as possible can access that matchday experience.
Yeah.
I also think about the beauty and the joy of audio described commentary. Yes, specifically for people who are blind and low vision or neurodivergent, but as I, self-identified earlier as not being a football aficionado, audio described commentary would be amazing for me, because in terms of how a defender or an attacker differs, that visual and contextual information would be really helpful. And just that idea of accessibility being something that's continuously implemented is just so powerful.
Yeah, well, I actually undertook the training for that, and I've got to be honest, that is a very, very difficult job. The people that we have, because the element of what they have to describe and to make it the quality that we want it to be is phenomenal, and they are absolutely amazing at what they do.
So as you've shared already, there is huge demand for tickets, and not to create more demand, but also to create more demand.
Yeah.
Can you just tell me a little bit about the process of acquiring accessible tickets for either a singular game or a season ticket? I ask this because culturally at the moment, we are having conversations around ticket access, not just in football, but also in music and entertainment, and it is becoming a barrier for so many people. So how does it work at Wrexham?
I've got to be honest, as a wheelchair user myself, this isn't going to be the ideal answer. We are currently in discussions and looking at our system so that people can go online and book for themselves. We do not have that in place currently. If you need a companion to come with you, it will let you book online for yourself, but it doesn't identify who then needs a companion ticket and who doesn't. So at this moment in time, I am the link to the fans that need companion tickets throughout our club. Some people say they absolutely love it because they have me to support anything at all that they need, the process. I ring them, I personally chat to them. So I feel that my role has very much given a voice to disabled fans within our club. So a lot do like that system. Obviously, there is going to be people that would far rather be able to book online themselves. And that is something that Wrexham are very much looking into. And hopefully before the end of this season, that will be in place. But currently, fans either contact me via phone or email. I ask people to put what they're needing, the area that they're needing to sit in, what their needs are, if they need low level access seating or our quiet zone, and put a phone number, and then I ring and discuss with them and organise their tickets over the phone with them. So the ticketing side of the accessibility is a huge job. One that sort of takes a lot of my role, but one I actually quite like because it does give me that one-on-one with fans. I know who everybody is. I know what their needs are. So it isn't going to be what everybody would prefer. I know there'll be a lot of people say, no, that should now be an online system, but it is something we're working towards.
I think what you've described as that accessibility often means flexibility. It often means that one person will want to book autonomously and be able to do the entire process independently using digital supports. Whereas for others, having that almost white glove service that you talked to there in terms of understanding that what is accessible for one person might be inaccessible for another, and that you are the human connector, in an era where we are talking about AI, to be able to support people and set them up for success, having your understanding and lived experience as a disabled woman also, but knowing intimately the grounds, the support systems that are in place to truly support people, which I think is incredible. And to your point, having both these people options.
Yeah, I do worry that I hope that the service, when it is in place, that people have a choice, because I do worry that I've been at the club nearly 7 years, and the fans with disabilities that I support have always had me there, and I would hate that service to be taken away from them and they're suddenly expected to do it online if they don't want to. I would like to think that they have a choice. I mean, at the moment, the way our tickets are on a general, 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, a fixture can go on sale, and by 8 minutes past 10, we're putting out on social media that every ticket in the ground is sold. So on a general, so it's very difficult to get tickets currently at Wrexham Football Club.
That feels like a cautionary tale to both me and the audience. Noted, but I will still try, is what I will say, Kerry. You were talking there about companions. And I wanted to ask this question because my understanding, particularly as a disabled person myself, trying to often book tickets, whether it's to venues, but also to matches, for example, is that often there is the assumption that disabled people have no friends or no family members, or that the only person that can or should come with them is a caregiver. And then also how that plays out in the seating, if there is seating, can be quite challenging. People can be sat behind you rather than beside you. How is Wrexham currently managing that particular piece of the puzzle?
In the main, if you need a companion ticket, you either have, if you're an ambulant disabled person, you have somebody sitting at the side of you. If you're a wheelchair user, you then have, obviously you have, with our wheelchair users, we do 2 spaces because wheelchairs are obviously larger. We're not going to cram everybody in, and then you have your companion at the side of you. I've got to be honest, it's something that I'm very passionate about, this question. We do all our companions alongside. So there's one companion alongside, for the very reason that I have a lot of people that come to Wrexham Football Club that are non-verbal. If they had a companion that was sat behind them, they wouldn't be able to contact their companion. They wouldn't be able to get their attention. And in a lot of clubs, they actually do companions behind, because the companion is free of charge, and it's the person who has paid to come, say, in a wheelchair to watch the match, and the companion is put behind. And it's something I'm really passionate that is not the case at Wrexham. We also, just to answer the part 2 of your question, we do have on our second platform, we have availability that we can have extra family members. There's only 4 spaces, but if you contact me and you say, I've got family up and I'm wanting myself and my companion and 3 other members of my family to come, and we'd all like to sit together, we have an area for 4 spaces that I can actually do that and put extra family members sitting with you as well, which I think is really important, because it's something that when I go to concerts, I don't want my husband to sit behind me. You know, I want us to go and sit together. So it is something that we are very aware of at Wrexham.
I just often think about, even in other sports, and I hear this from friends sometimes, that the accessible area might be a space for 1 person or 2 people, but the rest of the group sits elsewhere. So much about the experience is the socialization part. It is about being able to, whether it's making eye contact, a joke, engaging with somebody if you're non-talking, it's about that community. And I think often to accommodate disabled people, we divide them, because to your point, there's potentially limited resources or limited capacity. But I think some of it also speaks to our belief around disabled people, or again, designing for them rather than with them.
Yes, I totally agree. That was why I was so sort of pushing the fact that we needed an area. It is limited, and in most cases it is 1 person and their companion, but we do have that extra provision that people can bring more family members, and I think that's really important.
And I love that as an idea and as a case study for stadiums or places that are far bigger than what Wrexham has, to be able to look to that as something that is a better practice that other people can model and put in place. But as you shared, you know, you've been at Wrexham for quite some time. How do you think the definition of accessibility has changed at Wrexham over time?
I mean, to be honest, as we've discussed all the things we've put in place before, we've done a lot of changes. There is definitely more that we need to do and more that we will do. But most clubs at our level are very, very limited facilities, unfortunately. You know, we're still talking quite basic. We've just come out of a league where we actually went to one away fixture and they didn't have an accessible toilet, which I didn't understand how they could even, you know, they could even have the fixture running with that. But so that's what we're contending with. So there is so much more to be done. It's, you know, it's unbelievable, really.
And even thinking about, to your point, that if there is accessible transport for wheelchair users, then it's not within Wrexham's remit. But if it's at an away location, if that individual can't go to the bathroom or there is an inconsistency with experience, it really does set the intention for the entire league and football as a whole to do more, because we can see the value of it when that equity of experience is provided.
Yeah, I mean, all clubs can do more, you know, even Premiership clubs that have, you know, have done absolutely fantastic and got a lot of things in place. There's always more to be done.
That's it. And just when we think we're finished or that we've done enough or as much as we can, the world will change, people will change, access will be different, technology will provide solutions, hopefully it will become more affordable. So to your point, I think there's always more to do.
Most definitely.
I have to tell people a kind of piece of information that I learned just before we started, that in terms of both the work that you do and who you are, it is quite often that you become recognized and people ask you if you're that person from that documentary. I guess I have seen Welcome to Wrexham and loved it. How did you need to be convinced to be part of it? What was the conversation that happened in advance of it? What has been the kind of outcomes or the things that have surprised you about Welcome to Wrexham?
I was very, very nervous about Welcome to Wrexham, I have to be honest, and I did have to be convinced to be on it. I very much didn't go on it as Kerry Evans. I'm very much Kerry Evans from little old Wrexham, who's doing a job that I love. I didn't want to be a TV star. What I did want to do was to be able to do a platform of showing the good practice that we're doing for fans with disabilities. So to be able to have the showcase, to be able to put that forward, I had to take the opportunity. I was very nervous. You obviously do your filming, you know what you've said, you don't know what's going to be edited. So until it came out, I was very, very nervous of the whole thing, if I'm honest. I was delighted at how it came across and how much it showcased and was so positive about my role, what we've put in place and how much we have done, which we have. You know, we do really need to be proud of what we've done at Wrexham for disability. So, but as far as, I mean, you know, I had people from across the pond saying, could I go on to colleges to do speeches? Could I do Zooms with different organisations? People getting in touch from all around the world saying, can you give me some advice on how I could do this? And it definitely put us on a global front, I think. I mean, none of us ever expected it to go global, but that's really what it did, wasn't it? I've had people that have said to me, I don't even like football, but we've absolutely loved Welcome to Wrexham because it's the story as well.
People invest in people.
Yeah.
And I think
definitely.
The episode around episode 3, you know, to tell that story and to prioritize the importance of creating equity of experience for disabled people at the matches, but then simultaneously your own journey and coming on full time and being such a valued and important member of staff. I think that is instructive to not just football, but to both audiences. It challenges their assumptions and biases if they hold them, but it is also a blueprint for what other organizations need to be doing. And it proves the successes. To your point, there's always more work to do, but we do actually have to also reflect and go, this was great, this worked, this person got to go to a football game for the first time because of something that we put in place. And I think it would have been easy to not feature it as part of the narrative, but it was incredibly important that it did.
Yeah, I mean, just for an example, one thing that I've not mentioned that I'm hugely proud of is we set up power chair football. We were the first club in Wales to set up power chair football. That's enabling fans in wheelchairs who, myself included, being a wheelchair user, would have said, can't play football, I'm in a wheelchair. And now that's exactly what they're doing. And there was also clubs got in touch and said, well, how did you set it up? So even from that effect, hopefully there will be more power chair football clubs set up due to the documentary and the work that we've done. And so yeah, it's had a huge positive impact.
I think about the ripple effect. The World Dwarf Games are taking place in Germany in the coming days. We have the Paralympics taking place in Paris next year, and then Los Angeles. And there's such opportunity for thinking about greater representation of disabled people across the spectrum of disability in sport and how important that is. We've talked a little bit about physical space in terms of different stadiums and also the Premiership League, etc. And I guess one of my questions is, where do you think football has to go? What are the next steps? And what should the big aim be?
I personally think in the future, all of football should have a complete framework that we all work towards. So, because I'm very passionate about the fact, if anybody contacts me to ask my advice, like we've recently had a club ask about our quiet zone, by giving out that information, my fans, if they go to that club, are going to have that experience when they get there. So I'm very much not somebody that thinks, well, I've done this and I'm going to keep that to myself. This is something we should be sharing on a whole, right through the pyramid of football. And this is something that there should be a framework set in place that we all follow and a standard that we all aim to be at.
And I almost think about, does that need to be something that people have to be compliant to? And then our mindset around this work is that often when compliance comes in, it creates this approach that it's a tick the box exercise and one is done and completed, whereas setting almost up a code of conduct or expectations, and for that to be both with fans and with the owners of clubs or with the people who work there, I think is really important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
I'm mindful that we have a mix of different people who are participating in this webinar, who are from different countries, different backgrounds, of different identities. And I know that there are some disabled people who are interested in sport and who are great advocates for this work, who I think one day would love to follow a similar path in terms of your own advocacy and work in this space. But what advice would you give them in terms of being the Disability Liaison Officer at Wrexham? How could they engage in similar work? What does that look like?
I'm very much, at the end of the day, you keep pushing. You believe in what you're doing. And if you get a door shut in your face, you find a new way round. I'm somebody very much, just to go back to our accessible away travel, that was a no to me. I was told that I wouldn't be able to achieve that. So I found another way round and I raised the money myself and we did accessible away travel. So very much don't be put off if you get a no at first, look for other ways round. Don't give up and keep trying. And I think my biggest thing when I ever do talks or I'm asked things, I always say every single person is good at something. You've got to find out what your thing is. If I'm totally honest, I never ever believed that my thing would be being a disability liaison officer in a football club, but I've definitely found my passion and I've definitely found where I fit.
I think that idea of not giving up and how so often the first response that we get to things is a no. The team and I had the great opportunity, and there's no way of saying this casually, to work with NASA last year. And one of the things that I really took away, we didn't go to space yet, but one of the things that I took away from that experience was a learning that there is a leadership approach at NASA where the response is yes, if. I think so often as disabled people, we come up against a no because people maybe haven't imagined what's possible, or we just have to maintain the status quo. Whereas at NASA, they say, yes, you can do this if. So to your point around the accessible away travel, yes, you can do this if the resources or the finances are funded in order to be able to support it. Whereas so often we exist in a world where the answer is just no, because they don't know what another answer might be.
Yeah,
Thank you
I've
very much.
learned I don't take no's. I find I go away. I look at it and think, well, how are we going to achieve this? And I look for another way around, because I think everything's possible. I really do. So I would say to anybody, don't ever give up. Don't ever give up.
Keep trying. I love that. We asked people to submit some questions. They are coming in through the chat box and the Q&A box, and people have submitted them in advance already. And I would love to spend some time going through them, because there's some just really great insights here. Somebody asked in advance of the session, in terms of reoccurring members of the club, so season ticket holders who are disabled, do they need to make accommodations for every visit, or is there like an understanding or almost like a season ticket holder access passport where what they need is just set up for every match? How does that work for season
Yes, it's completely, they get the only difference with that would be when we've got cup games. So they get their season ticket pass, they get the seats that they have requested, they get their companion sat at the side of them, they come through either a turnstile or the accessible entrance that we've discussed earlier if they're a wheelchair user or they're using our quiet zone, and everything is put in place for every single game, all 23 of the season.
Oh, wow. So there's like that kind of muscle memory almost within the organization of who they are and what they need. So that consistency is really important.
I know most of our fans that are under what I say sort of my support if they need it. I know them all by face. I know, so I'm there and I'm very visible on a match day. I'm at our accessible entrance. Everybody knows where to find me. Everybody knows where my seating is on the front row. And I'm very, very visible to people. I say, please come and talk to me. If people have got an idea that I haven't thought of or something that they think needs improving, come and tell me, because I can't improve things if I don't know. So I very, very much put myself out there on match days to every fan that needs me.
In terms of the work that we do, we often say that we don't know what we don't know, and that this is about continuously learning, and that there are so many gaps in our knowledge, and that's actually to be something we're invigorated by rather than fearful of. In terms of that learning piece, how do you gain feedback from fans? How do you kind of gather and listen to those insights in terms of just continuously improving the experience?
I'm always there to chat to. People know how to get hold of me via email. I'm on social media through Twitter and Facebook, officially through the club DLO. But we also, at least twice, if not 3 times a season, we do put out questionnaires that every single fan gets on a match day. And it's always, what are we doing good? What do you think we could improve on? Are there any comments that you'd like to make? To be fair, they're usually very positive, which is great. But on the other hand, sometimes I'd like people to sort of put, because we need to keep being pushed, at the end of the day. But yeah, I'm very big on that sort of thing, because at the end, I feel I would never, how can I improve things? I'm a lady in a wheelchair, but I don't know every other disability. So I need those people to tell me what they need, for us to be able to put in place. And that's where we gain our knowledge, and that's where we get better.
And I think setting up that culture where you are available to people to have those conversations, because people can be nervous. If it was me, to ask for a footstool feels like something that I should just be bringing with me myself as a little person, because that is an inconvenience for you, but I may not be able to even get into the grounds with a footstool in my backpack. And I think to your point, continuously reaching out to members, having those relationships, building them deeply and strongly with people so that they feel safe to say, Kerry, by the way, here's something that would work for me, or this isn't working for me. But that doesn't happen overnight, be it at Wrexham or be it at any organization.
No, it's something that we've worked on throughout my time at Wrexham. And I think, well, I'd like to think that, I'm doing a very good job of that communication level now. We do get very good feedback.
In terms of bigger picture, and we talked a little bit about where football needs to go. And one of those solutions, as you said, is about a framework that everybody should be not even just adhering to, but embedding, making sure that it's everybody's responsibility, top down, bottom up, and thinking about it as a continuous opportunity. But I think where we're seeing great progress is from a fan perspective in terms of having more and more fans coming through. You talked there also about wheelchair users being athletes themselves and being footballers themselves. But in terms of where football needs to go about employment and representation of disabled people in football, you know, what do you think that could or should look like? And I share that thinking about how the fact that Rob McElhenney has recently self-identified as disabled and spoken about his own invisible disabilities, which I think is such a powerful call to action for so many people in leadership. But outside of Rob, in football generally, how do we need to think about employment?
That's a huge question, and to be honest, yeah, it does need improving. You know, I can only speak as Wrexham, and I can't even get around our stadium internally at this moment, which we are making improvements on all the time. But you know, a disabled person has got as much to offer as an able-bodied person. I feel that there is a place within football for everyone. I think that there needs to be an understanding of what people need to be able to do that job. You know, just a simple thing like when I started working in the office, I needed a rise and fall desk because I have horrendous problems with my back and I couldn't be in a desk that I leaned all the time. So to be fair, they got me a rise and fall desk. So that's very simple. That's, you know, but I think that's where it's lacking. I think the understanding of what people need to be able to do the job and be able to take on the job and do it well. And that's still lacking. It's lacking in Wrexham. So I'm pretty sure that it would be lacking across the board within football, if I'm totally honest.
And I don't think it's limited to just football. I think that's lacking in industry.
Yeah, it's lacking to every industry is, and I think I'm very much, I feel a lot of it is a lack of understanding. You know, to stick up for Wrexham in that sense. It's not they won't do it. They didn't realise they needed to do it. So if that makes sense, you know, so sometimes, like we had, just to give you an example, we had to our club shop, we had a ramp so that wheelchair users could get into the club shop, but at the top of it we had a heavy fire door that didn't have a push button, so you could get up the ramp, and they thought that was what was needed. And you know, if you've not got a me, I suppose, you know, you think you've done good with that. I came along and said, well, no, I've got one hand on my chair and I'm paralyzed in the other hand and I can't get in. So now all our doorways, including our players' entrance and everything, are all on push buttons. So, you know, it's that, to me, it's the lack of understanding, I think, is more prevalent than that people won't do it.
And the lack of exposure to disability and disabled people, you know.
Yes.
There's a great quote that I love by an architect called Simone de Gale. And she talks about, it's not the fact that disabled people didn't exist, but that the buildings were inaccessible. And you can transfer a building for football stadium for a recruitment process. And that often means that there's a huge weight attached to the person who becomes not necessarily the exception, but the first in those spaces to create as much space as possible for others. But
yes,
to your point, I think, you know, even if we think about job descriptions, which is often where we do some work in, if you look to a job description, often it talks about a requirement for people to be a strong communicator. In what? Verbally, written, British Sign Language, American Sign Language. But these biases are so entrenched in what we view work to be, what we view adding value to be, that actually disabled people often either rule themselves out, or the organizations themselves, yes, they don't know that they have to do it. And then when there's a realization that this is something that they should and could and want to do, sometimes they don't know how. And creating that space, to your point, for people to know what to ask for firstly, and then to know what's available and to put it in place, it takes time, unfortunately, far longer than we would like it to be right now. but there's a great examples of disabled people in leadership and really thriving in the workforce more and more. And we need it to be a bit faster and a bit more efficient, and we need to grow that awareness and understanding.
I'm very, very lucky at Wrexham. A very silly thing to say on this probably, but I every single member of staff treats me Kerry. I'm not the lady in the wheelchair. I'm not. And recently I actually laughed to myself because it made me realise how normal, I suppose, that I'm treated the same as everybody else, because our CEO came out of our club shop and said, let's walk and talk, Kerry. Well, so I'm riding along at the side of her and we're having a conversation going to the next meeting. And to me, that makes me feel very included, that there is no the lady in the wheelchair, there's just Kerry Evans.
And I think, what we will learn undoubtedly, even from the people participating here, is that people want different things from their own experience. But I think what you're speaking to there is about respect. It's about rights. It's about equity. It's about understanding that people have a right to dignity, that people have a right to employment, a right to feel included. And the way in which the culture is being developed at Wrexham, in terms of at least what it sounds like, is that people are valid and valued for who they are, what they do, and the different identities that they hold. But what you were talking to earlier around the desk and needing a rise and fall desk reminded me of an experience that I had. So I am a teacher by training, so I used to be in the classroom. And I remember being really excited to teach in a special education environment, which is the language we use here in Ireland, particularly for those with certain types of disabilities in terms of outside of mainstream education. And I remember being in the classroom, at the top of the classroom as a teacher, and that the classroom was incredibly accessible to me because it was accessible to the students. The only place that was inaccessible to me was the staff room. I couldn't make myself a cup of tea because there was an assumption that that's where the non-disabled people were, and that the classroom was accessible, but the place where there was networking, gathering, sharing of lesson plans, why would there ever be disabled people there? And those are the biases that just exist in our world too often, which I think we're beginning to unpick. I wanted to ask you a question that came in also from somebody else, because you were talking to there about sometimes the barriers that we just have to overcome in terms of implementing accessibility. You talked about away travel being a no, and then all of a sudden it being a yes.
Yeah.
Because you found a solution. What are the barriers or the challenges that you've experienced at Wrexham in terms of prioritizing accessibility?
If I'm totally honest, with the last 2 years, we have gone from a little old town of Wrexham with a football club in the National League to suddenly being on a global stage through Ryan and Rob, and so many changes. It is unbelievable. And with that comes priorities. So, we didn't 2 years ago, we didn't have a women's team. We now do. This last season, they've just won the Welsh Premier League. So they're now going to be playing for the Welsh Premier League. We've just set up an academy which we haven't had before. We've probably tripled our staff. So from that point of view, I very much had to realise that it takes time, and every department feels that they have as much right to the pot of money and the changes that are having to be made as anybody else. Obviously, accessibility, disability is very much high on the agenda, and it's something that, I've said previously, people may have already heard me saying, when Ryan and Rob were taking over the club, Rob McElhenney actually contacted me via phone before they even spoke to fans to ask would I come on board and continue the journey with them. When I then said that I would, he, in the whole of the speech when they were first trying to sell their vision to the fans who owned the club, he kept mentioning how important accessibility and disability was to them, and how they'd had conversations with me and how they were going to support me. So right from the off, I knew that, I was on a good thing here, and that what I wanted to do and make a difference was hopefully going to be a reality. But it is taking time because we're growing completely as a club, and there are so many different departments that suddenly need to be nurtured and grown. So that's where I think, you know, sort of any sort of delay in the growth may come through us being now, you know, the club that we are really.
I'm thinking about kind of learnings that are applicable to other organizations. And even from there, what we spoke to is leadership commitment in terms of from the top that this is a priority, but also capital investment and social and cultural investment. So even as you were speaking to there in terms of how the CEO engages with you and that relationship. But I think secondly is that what we know is that when we are trying to transform spaces that historically are inaccessible and moving to a place of greater accessibility, that requires investment of time, of money and resources, and just in terms of capacity. If I think about the sensory experience that you brought us through, from all the way through to automatic doors, which are not free, but really important that we invest in them, that actually those are, I think, two learnings of how we accelerate this work in other organizations, that leadership looking at this work as an investment and not a cost, that it's a continuous practice. But if I could boldly ask you to, I guess, advise the many organizations that are part of this conversation, from beauty to the nonprofit sector to arts organizations to startups and entrepreneurs who are all here today, what advice would you give them about the best practices that other organizations can adopt?
There is plenty can be done that doesn't have to cost the earth. There really is. When I first started up our sensory room, we did that under fan ownership. We had no funds, we had no money. And I say to many clubs, you know, I always speak from a club perspective because that's what I'm in, but I speak to other clubs and clubs say, oh, we won't get the funding. We know we won't get the funding. And I said, you know, you don't have to be spending the earth on this. There are so many changes that you could make that are quite inexpensive, and just the communication, discussion, what people would like to be put in place, you know, sort of, you know, and ask for help. I've through being in the role I'm in, I've on many occasions said the DLO needs blah 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 on social media, and I usually get 15 offers of help, and people, you know, people who'll come in and help that have done things at the club for me free of charge. And I just think it's very much information. You know, people have got to look at what's around them and what other people have done, you know, and build. You don't need to be sort of spending an absolute fortune to start off. I think, you know, start day one and build. If people can see that you are trying to make a difference, that is the key.
I think that point around communication and information is so important, because I think where we're seeing growing advocacy and work in the space is that organizations are telling people what they have, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
But sometimes they don't then say what they don't have. So I think about the example that you shared previously of the gift shop, and that they will tell people that there may be a ramp to the gift shop, but they maybe previously didn't say that it's a fire door that weighs X amount, and it might be quite challenging.
Exactly.
And it's how we give people the information that they need to make the decisions that are right for them, because disabled people know and have a great understanding of their own expertise and capacity, and communication, to your point, is the greatest possible starting point.
Yeah, I also think that in my own position, I was the disabled person put in the role, and I think the best people to ask are the people who are disabled. You know, that's where you need to start. That's where you need to say, you know, what can change, what can be a difference. Very off topic. When I first went into a wheelchair, I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what was, because I was new to it. It was all new to me. I had an adapted kitchen done, and the company that came in and did it, it was all done without any advice from me, any sort of thing from me. And when it was completed, they said, well, to pass it off, can you make a cup of tea? And I said, no. And they said, well, why can't you make it a cup of tea? And they'd done all the units at sort of this height. So I'd have been making cups of tea. Now, this was a company that, you know, knew that I was a lady in a wheelchair. This was being built for me specifically. And that just proved to me, if I'm honest, how important it is to have disabled people in these roles telling you what you need. You know, now I would straight away tell them exactly what I'd need, and I'd know what, you know, what to say. But at that point, I didn't.
And just the growing confidence of disabled people. But even that
Yes.
idea of those who are experts may not have the expertise that's really needed to
Yeah.
set people up for success. And we should sidebar about kitchens, because I've just went through an accessible kitchen experience, and I think we'll have a lot to talk to. But thinking about, you know, next steps for people. And as we shared earlier, you know, sometimes people don't know that this is work that they should be doing, and then they get a greater understanding and then don't know how. One of the questions that we've got in the chat box is about, like, is there a guide for clubs who would like to do more or would like to start? Because sometimes for them, depending on their size or just the representation, they don't know where to start, particularly when budget is potentially a challenge. Is there a guide or a toolkit?
There most definitely is. There's a green guide that all clubs can follow that gives best practice for everything. In actual fact, in the National League, we didn't have to follow that guide. However, I was very, very grateful now going into the EFL this season that we have always followed that. And from when I got my job, we were always told to look in the green guide and, to the best of our ability, follow that guidance, which has been fantastic now because we've already got the things in place moving into the EFL. There's also an organisation, Level Playing Field. Now they are a charity, but they are for disability, accessibility, inclusion, and they guide on the very best practice right up to you know, the top of the pyramid. They are there for every single club. They are there for disabled fans for their opinions, as well as they are there for the disability liaison officers, the disability access officers within the pyramid. They're a fantastic organisation, and an organisation that I have a really, really good relationship, and I use them regularly to ask for advice. There's also CAFE. And they're a European sporting organisation that again offer inclusion, accessibility and disability, and inclusion and accessibility and diversity. And they again are very much along the lines of Level Playing Field, but they cover Europe rather than Level Playing Field just the UK. And I can't say enough about those two organisations. They've been an absolute wealth of information to me.
Well, I think those are some amazing resources to leave people with. There is a couple of questions that we haven't got to. Kerry, I might email those to you in case there's any further insights that we can share back, but I cannot thank you enough for your time. What a brilliant way to celebrate Disability Pride Month. And I just really appreciate your generosity of insights, of expertise and advice, but also in sharing so much of yourself with us. I think often we ask disabled people to share so much of themselves, and I am conscious that that is a gift, and I really appreciate the ways in which that you've done it with us. Thank you.
Can I just say one other thing, because I was actually blown away by this fact that I was researching. There's 1 billion disabled people alive today, and it's the world's largest minority group. 15%, so that we're 15% of the world's population, and over 50% of disabled people have never ever been to a sporting event. And that's something that I personally at Wrexham would like to change. I think that is, you know, I'm not gonna be able to change the world, but I would definitely like to start at Wrexham, because I think every single person should have the opportunity. Even if they go once in their lifetime and they don't like it, they should have the opportunity to attend a live sporting event. And I think I'd just like to end by saying that, really, because that's so important.
If I think about here in Ireland, it's 22% of the population. It's 16 million people in the UK. And that's with the stigma, with people not feeling disabled enough to self-identify as disabled, people not using the language, people feeling uncomfortable around it. So I think this is a growing population, particularly as we age. But thank you. We have recorded this conversation. It will be available on tiltingthelens.com along with a transcript. What I would just say to end is that today is a celebration of Disability Pride Month. Tomorrow is the 33rd anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is where Disability Pride Month comes from. If you haven't yet signed up for the newsletter at Tilting the Lens, please do so now. You can go to tiltingthelens.com, or the team will share a link in the chat box. Tomorrow, we will be sharing some quotes and some experiences of a disabled leader that we really admire. I can't tell you who it is or you won't sign up, but that is coming tomorrow. And as we evolve these conversations and these webinar series, we really want to know what are the industries you want to learn from, who are the people you want to admire, what are the ways in which we can make these conversations more and more accessible. Do let us know. Email us at team@tiltingthelens.com. But Kerry, thank you so much again. Nikki, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Anya and Emma at the Tilting the Lens team in the back end for making this webinar possible. But happy Disability Pride Month, everybody. And I am going to look up those resources, Kerry, that you just shared, because if anybody needs to know more about accessible football, it's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.